They say a barn is more than just a building. It's a piece of your life, a place where memories are stored, hard work is done, and sometimes peace is found. For me, that barn was everything. Nestled right behind my house, it stood tall and proud, a symbol of years of sweat and patience. I built it with my own hands, and every plank, every nail had a story. So, imagine my shock when one morning I woke up to find the entrance completely blocked. Not by some pile of debris or fallen tree, but by a vehicle parked dead center, right across the gate. It wasn't just any car, it was what the HOA called their police car. Official looking, with decals and flashing lights, parked like a sentry guarding some forbidden territory. At first, I thought it was a mistake. Maybe a visitor had parked poorly. But no, this was deliberate. I called the HOA office, asking who gave permission for that. They told me it was part of their new enforcement policy. They claimed it was for security reasons, but the truth was clear. It was to block my barn entrance, to stop me from using my own property, as I always had. I couldn't believe it. Years of building, maintaining, and caring for that barn, reduced to a game piece in some HOA power play. They weren't just putting up rules. They were trying to take control. Control of my land, my access, my freedom. The neighbors noticed. They whispered in the streets, some nodding in support, others shaking their heads. But no one did anything. The HOA was known to be strict. Their so-called cops patrolled the neighborhood, enforcing rules with an iron fist. People feared them, but I wasn't about to back down. I tried talking to the board. Emails, phone calls, formal letters. All ignored or answered with vague threats. You must comply with community standards. Blocking access violates HOA rules. But they never explained why they were blocking my barn in the first place. Days went by. The car stayed. Sometimes an officer sat inside, watching. Sometimes it was empty, but still there. It felt like a cage, a daily reminder that my rights were being trampled. I wonder how this was even legal. One evening, I stood by the gate, staring at that car. I felt trapped. My barn was useless if I couldn't get inside. My tools, my equipment, everything locked behind that blockade. I thought about calling the police for trespassing, but the HOA had this police car and the backing of their own security. Who would listen? That's when anger started to burn. Not blind rage, but a slow, steady fire. I decided I wouldn't let them bully me off my own land. They wanted a war? Fine, but I was going to fight smart. I spent that night planning. Not just how to move that car, but how to send a message they'd never forget. I dusted off the old harvester, an old machine I kept running for years, but rarely used anymore. It was powerful, bulky, and perfect for what I had in mind. The next morning, I went out early, before anyone was awake. I walked to the barn entrance, the harvester gleaming under the dawn light. I took a deep breath. This wasn't just about a vehicle blocking my gate. It was about standing up for what's mine. For every hour spent building, every moment I had to defend my property, I climbed into the harvester's seat, the engine roaring to life. The sound echoed through the quiet neighborhood, waking birds and shaking leaves. I edged forward slowly, eyes fixed on the police car. It sat there, shiny and smug, but it was about to meet something much bigger. As I moved closer, I thought about the rules the HOA threw at me, the rules they twisted to trap me. But I knew one thing. No paper rule could stop real power. No official badge could override my right to my own land. The harvester's massive front blade hit the car with a grinding force. Metal crumpled. Glass shattered. The sound was like thunder. I could feel every vibration through controls. It wasn't just destruction. It was reclaiming. People started to notice. From windows, from yards, they came out slowly, watching the harvester push the car backward, off the gate. Some shook their heads in disbelief. Some smiled. Some whispered about finally standing up to the HOA. When the car finally toppled to the side, blocking the street instead of my barn, I climbed down and locked the gate behind me. I was breathing hard, heart racing, adrenaline pumping. But most of all, I was free. That day changed everything. The HOA could no longer ignore that I wasn't going to be pushed around. Their police car was a symbol of their control, but I had crushed it, not just with metal, but with my refusal to give up. I knew battles like this weren't won with polite letters or quiet complaints. Sometimes you have to make noise. Sometimes you have to show strength. Because when your home and your livelihood are on the line, you fight back with everything you've got. After that day, word spread fast. The story of how I took down the HOA's police car when my harvester became the talk of the neighborhood. Some called it reckless. Others called it justice. But no one could deny it shook things up. The HOA board didn't take it lightly. Within hours, I started getting messages. First, polite warnings. Then threats. You violated community guidelines. You will face consequences. But the truth was clear. They had no legal ground. That car was their way to bully me, and I had shown I wasn't afraid. Neighbors came forward, quietly at first, sharing their own frustrations. Stories of petty rules, unfair fines, and constant surveillance. Some told me they'd been scared to speak out. The HOA had a reputation, strict, unyielding, and sometimes vindictive. But now, people felt a shift. If one person could fight back, maybe others could too. One afternoon, an elderly couple from 2 houses down stopped by. They brought a basket of homemade cookies and told me how they watched everything from their porch. They said they admired my courage, that it gave them hope. "We've been feeling trapped," the woman said, "but you reminded us that we still have rights." It wasn't just about me anymore. It was about standing up to a system that wanted to control every inch of our lives. But the fight wasn't over. The HOA retaliated in other ways. They started sending inspectors, looking for violations on my property. Overgrown grass, misplaced garden tools, even the color of my front door. Each fine was a slap in the face, a reminder that they hadn't given up. I kept a calm front, but inside, I was ready. Every letter, every warning only strengthened my resolve. I knew the law was on my side. Property rights, reasonable use, freedom from harassment. They were all there. I just had to be patient and firm. Friends and family offered advice too. Lawyers, neighbors who had faced similar battles, even some local activists. They told me to document everything. Photos, videos, written records. "You'll need proof," one said. They played dirty. So I did. I set up cameras around the barn, took pictures every time someone from the HOA came onto my property, kept copies of every letter. I wasn't just defending my barn anymore. I was preparing for a long fight. Then, one evening, the HOA board sent a formal letter demanding I remove some of the trees I had planted near the barn. They claimed the roots might damage community water lines. It was the latest in a series of attempts to pressure me into giving up. I hired an independent arborist to inspect the trees. The report came back clear. The trees were healthy, far enough away from any utility lines, and actually helped stabilize the soil. I sent the report back to the HOA. They ignored it, frustrated but not defeated. I organized a meeting with some neighbors who had experienced similar harassment. We gathered at a local cafe, sharing stories, pooling ideas. We talked about forming a neighborhood alliance to protect our rights and hold the HOA accountable. The more people who joined, the stronger we became. We started attending HOA meetings as a group, asking tough questions, refusing to be silenced. The board wasn't used to this kind of pushback. Their usual tactics, intimidation, fine silence, were losing power. Slowly, the community began to change. Neighbors who once kept their heads down started speaking up. Homeowners who had been afraid to plant flowers or put up fences without permission began taking small steps toward reclaiming their yards. It was a quiet revolution. Meanwhile, I kept working on the barn and my land. The trees grew taller. The garden flourished. My harvester sat nearby, a symbol of what happens when you refuse to be controlled. The HOA tried one last move. They threatened to sue me for damaging HOA property when I destroyed the car. Their case was weak. There was no clear ownership of the vehicle, and it was blocking my private property. But they wanted to scare me. I didn't back down. With the help of a lawyer friend, I filed a countersuit for harassment and illegal blocking of access. The legal battle was about to begin, but I felt ready. In the meantime, The neighborhood was watching. What started as a single fight over a block barn entrance had become a stand for everyone's rights. It was a reminder that sometimes you have to push back hard against those who try to control you. Every day, I walked past the barn gate, now open wide. The harvester parked quietly in the shade. The trees lining the driveway swayed gently in the breeze. And I knew, no matter what came next, I had already won something far bigger than a battle over vehicle. After the legal papers were filed, things got intense. The HOA doubled down, sending more letters, hiring private investigators, and trying to rally neighbors against me. Their meetings became heated, voices raised, threats thrown around like cheap darts. But I stayed calm. I knew this was part of their playbook. Pressure, confusion, wear you down. I refused to let it work. Every day, I checked my mailbox like clockwork. More notices about supposed violations, demands to remove equipment, fines piling up. But behind it all, I kept my focus on the barn, the land, and the trees I planted. They were my sanctuary, my fortress. No letter could touch that. The neighbors who once whispered in fear now spoke louder. They came over with questions, advice, even support. Some offered to help document the HOA's actions. Others shared stories of their own struggles with the board. What had been a lonely fight was becoming a community movement. One afternoon, a group of us gathered near my property line. We talked strategy, how to protect ourselves legally, how to push back without crossing lines, how to stay united. It was empowering. I realized this wasn't just about me anymore. It was about all of us who'd felt trapped by the HOA's heavy hand. Meanwhile, the barn stood solid. The entrance was clear, the driveway wide. My harvester sat like a silent guardian nearby. The trees, once small saplings, had grown tall and thick, creating a natural barrier against prying eyes. Birds nested there, squirrels darted through branches. It felt like the land was healing itself, growing stronger in defiance. Then came the day of the big HOA hearing. The board had called a special session to address the conflict. The entire neighborhood was buzzing. Some showed up curious, others nervous. I arrived early, ready with my documents, photos, and legal advice. I wasn't there just to defend myself. I was there to speak for everyone pushed around by the system. The room was tense. The HOA president tried to control the conversation, but residents were no longer intimidated. People shared stories, asked tough questions, and challenged vague rules. When it was my turn, I spoke clearly about my rights, the illegal blockade, and the harassment that followed. I presented the arbor's report, the photos, the letters. I wasn't angry, I was firm. It was a turning point. Some board members shifted in their seats. The mood changed. You could feel the power balance tipping. After hours of discussion, the HOA agreed to lift all fines against me and to remove any restrictions on my property. They promised no more vehicles blocking access. It was a small victory, but a victory nonetheless. The community felt the impact. Other residents began to question the board's authority, demand transparency, and push for more fair rules. The old fear started to fade. Back at my barn, I stood under the tall trees, feeling the breeze ruffle their leaves. The land was quiet, peaceful. I knew the fight wasn't over. HOAs have long memories, and I had made enemies. But I also knew that standing firm, standing together, was the only way to protect what's ours. Sometimes the hardest battles are the ones fought quietly, one step at a time with patience and grit. This was mine. And I wasn't done yet. Months passed, but the tension didn't fade. The HOA was quieter, yes, but their eyes were still on me and my barn. It was clear they hadn't given up, just waiting for the right moment to strike back. I wasn't about to let that happen. Every morning, I'd walk the property, checking the fence, the gates, and the trees that had grown thicker, stronger, like an army standing guard. The harvester still sat near the barn, a reminder of what happened. People passing by often gave a nod or a thumbs up. It became more than a machine. It was a symbol of resistance, a statement that I wasn't just a homeowner. I was a force to be reckoned with. One day, a new letter arrived. This time, it was about the driveway. They claimed it violated community standards and needed to be repaved with a specific material. They gave a deadline, threatening more fines. At first, it seemed like a small thing, but I knew better. It was their way of trying to wear me down, one rule at a time. Instead of reacting with anger, I decided to gather proof. I called in a contractor to inspect the driveway. The report said the driveway was safe and perfectly fine. I sent the report back to the HOA, demanding they drop the claim. But the letter they sent back was cold and firm, no exceptions. Frustration built up, but I stayed calm. I shared the news with neighbors, and many of them told me they'd been through the same cycle. Rules changing on a whim, fines popping up without cause. That's when an idea took root. What if we made a community newsletter? A way to keep everyone informed, to fight back with knowledge instead of anger. I started collecting stories, tips, and legal advice. Soon, the newsletter was printed and passed door to door. It gave people the tools to protect themselves. The HOA couldn't bully a whole neighborhood if everyone was prepared. At the next HOA meeting, the room was packed. More residents than ever stood up, asking questions, demanding answers. The board tried to push back, but their usual control was slipping. The community was waking up. Amidst all this, my barn became more than just a building. It was a meeting place, a symbol of standing firm. Neighbors gathered there to talk, to plan, and to support each other. We shared food, ideas, and laughter. The land around it felt alive, charged with something bigger than trees or machines. It was hope. One evening, as the sun dipped low, I looked out from the barn porch. The trees cast long shadows. The wind whispered through the leaves. It was quiet, but the silence was full of promise. No matter what the HOA tried next, I knew we were ready. I wasn't just defending a barn anymore. I was defending a community, a way of life. And sometimes that fight means planting roots deeper than any rule can reach. The next few weeks felt like walking a tightrope. Every move I made, I watched closely for the HOA's reaction. They were quieter now, but that silence was unsettling. I couldn't tell if they were regrouping or just caught off guard. Meanwhile, the neighborhood energy was shifting. People seemed more confident, less willing to let fear rule their lives. One afternoon, I received an unexpected visitor. It was one of the HOA board members, someone I'd never really spoken to before. He said he wanted to understand my side better, to see if we could find a way to avoid future conflicts. I was cautious but curious. Maybe this was the start of something different. We met near the barn, the place that had become the heart of the whole saga. I showed him the driveway, the trees, the harvester quietly parked nearby. We talked for hours, not about rules or fines, but about respect and community. He admitted the board had been too aggressive, too quick to punish instead of listen. It was a rare moment of honesty. That conversation didn't solve everything, but it opened a door. Over the next days, a few more board members reached out. Slowly, the tone of communication changed. Meetings became less about enforcing rules and more about finding common ground. Still, trust wasn't easy to rebuild. Many neighbors were skeptical. Years of strict HOA control had left deep scars. Some worried that the board's softer approach was just a tactic, a way to regroup and strike harder later. But I chose to hold on to hope. Meanwhile, the land around the barn thrived. The trees had grown tall enough to create a dense canopy, blocking views and giving me a sense of privacy I hadn't felt in years. The garden was lush, bursting with color and life. The harvester remained parked, a silent sentinel. One morning, I heard rumors that the HOA was planning to install surveillance cameras near my property. They claimed it was for community safety, but everyone knew it was to keep tabs on me. I wasn't surprised. I contacted a lawyer friend who helped me draft a formal complaint about privacy violations. The HOA backed off, realizing this fight wasn't just about property lines. It was about personal boundaries. The neighborhood started to rally more openly. People hosted potlucks, block parties, and community cleanups. We were reclaiming our streets, our homes, and our voices. The HOA board, once untouchable, was now being held accountable by the very people they were supposed to serve. At the same time, I began documenting everything. Photos of the land, recordings of conversations, copies of letters. I wanted to be prepared for whatever came next. It wasn't paranoia, it was practical. The past had taught me that the HOA could turn on a dime. The harvester was still there, but I didn't think about using it anymore. It had served its purpose. Now, it was a symbol of strength, a reminder that I had stood my ground. Every day, I walked the property lines, feeling the earth beneath my feet and the leaves rustling overhead. It was peaceful, but also powerful. The fight had changed me. It had changed the neighborhood. And it reminded me that sometimes standing up for what's right means growing stronger roots, slow, steady, and unbreakable. The seasons began to change, and with them, the neighborhood's mood shifted too. The early frost didn't touch the trees lining my barn. They stood tall and proud, their branches thick with leaves that whispered stories of resilience. Walking past them, I could feel the pulse of something bigger than just a fight between me and the HOA. It was about reclaiming space, respect, and freedom. Word spread that the HOA was trying to bring in new rules, even stricter than before. They wanted to regulate everything, from what plants you could have in your garden to how many vehicles you could park in your driveway. Their reach was growing, creeping into every corner of our lives. But this time, the community wasn't just watching. They were ready to push back. At the next HOA meeting, the room was packed beyond capacity. New faces sat beside familiar ones, all united by frustration and hope. The board tried to maintain control, but the energy had shifted. People asked pointed questions, demanded clear explanations, and refused to accept vague answers. It was no longer business as usual. When my turn came to speak, I stood with quiet confidence. I talked about the block barn entrance, the police car stunt, and the long fight that followed. I spoke about how the trees had grown not just to shield my property, but to shield the community from fear and oppression. The room was silent, some faces flushed with anger, others with shame. After the meeting, several neighbors approached me, thanking me for speaking out. They shared their own stories of small but painful conflicts with the HOA, fines for paint colors, letters about lawn lengths, threats over holiday decorations. It was clear these issues ran deep. That night, as I walked back to barn, the trees rustled in the cool breeze. They'd grown even thicker, their branches forming a natural wall. It was more than protection, it was a statement. Nature itself was on our side. The HOA didn't give up easily. In the weeks that followed, I noticed an increase in patrols, more surveillance, and more letters. But the community's spirit held strong. People attended workshops on homeowner rights, shared legal advice, and organized peaceful protests. The message was clear. We would no longer be silenced or controlled. One day, a group of us gathered near the barn for a planning session. We mapped out ways to ensure the HOA followed proper procedures, how to attend meetings in force, and how to support each other legally and emotionally. It felt like a new beginning, a chance to rewrite the story. The barn itself had become a symbol in the neighborhood. It wasn't just a building anymore. It was a beacon of resistance. The harvester, though no longer used to smash vehicles, remained parked nearby, quiet but ready. It reminded everyone that standing your ground sometimes means showing strength without violence. The trees, now towering over the fence lines, created a natural fortress. Birds nested in their branches, and wildflowers bloomed beneath their shade. The land was alive, vibrant, and fiercely protected. Neighbors started planting their own trees and shrubs, adding layers of privacy and beauty. Small acts of defiance turned into a collective movement. We were taking back what was ours, our homes, our yards, and our peace of mind. As I stood on the barn porch one evening, watching the sunset behind the trees, I felt a deep sense of pride. This wasn't just my fight anymore. It was ours. And as long as those trees stood tall, so would we. The air had changed in the neighborhood. What once felt like a quiet submission to the HOA's endless rules now hummed with a growing sense of defiance. People walked taller, spoke louder, and looked each other in the eyes with shared understanding. This wasn't just about property lines or fines anymore. It was about standing up and refusing to be pushed around. The barn, standing firm behind its wall of trees, had become a rallying point. On weekends, neighbors gathered there not just to talk, but to plan. They shared stories of petty punishments, unfair citations, and the crushing weight of living under constant surveillance. But they also shared ideas, how to organize, how to protect themselves, and how to push the HOA toward fairness and respect. One morning, a flyer appeared in my mailbox. It was an invitation to a neighborhood meeting, not one hosted by the HOA, but by the residents themselves. The goal was clear: to create a community alliance, a way to unite voices and create real change. I knew I had to be there. When the day came, the turnout was surprising. People I barely knew showed up, carrying chairs and snacks, ready to take their power back. The atmosphere buzzed with excitement and cautious hope. We weren't just neighbors anymore. We were a force. Discussions ran late into the evening. We talked about legal resources, community watches, and how to hold the HOA accountable. Volunteers stepped forward to draft petitions, organize events, and educate others about their rights. The energy was contagious. Meanwhile, the HOA's attempts to intimidate continued, but their efforts felt increasingly desperate. They blocked driveways, sent aggressive letters, and even tried to restrict gatherings. But each time, the community responded with unity and resilience. One afternoon, I noticed fresh tire tracks leading up to the barn's entrance. Someone had tried to block it again, this time with heavy equipment. Without hesitation, neighbors called me. Together, we cleared the way, laughing and working side by side. It was a small victory, but it sent a loud message. We weren't alone, and we wouldn't be silenced. The trees had grown so dense by now that the sun barely peeked through their leaves. They weren't just protecting my property. They were shielding a community that refused to be broken. Birds nested safely in their branches. Squirrels darted between trunks, and wildflowers carpeted the ground below. As word spread about our alliance, other neighborhoods began reaching out for advice. The story of the barn, the trees, and the harvester had become something bigger than a local dispute. It was a lesson in courage and standing firm against unfair power. At times, the fight felt exhausting. The constant emails, meetings, and confrontations drained energy and patience. But every time doubt crept in, a neighbor would share a story of progress. A rescinded fine, a board member stepping down, or a successful vote to change unfair policies. Those wins, no matter how small, fueled the fire. One quiet evening, I stood on the barn porch watching the sun dip below the horizon. The trees cast long shadows, and the air was thick with the scent of pine and earth. The harvester sat silently nearby, a reminder of battles fought and strength earned. The community had grown stronger. The HOA had learned that control wasn't as simple as writing rules and sending letters. It took more, a united front, a voice that refused to be ignored. And so the story continued, with roots digging deeper beneath the soil, branches stretching toward the sky, and a neighborhood that refused to be anything less than free. The neighborhood was no longer the quiet, controlled place the HOA once envisioned. The spirit of resistance had seeped into every street, every front porch, and every backyard. What started as my personal fight over a block barn entrance had blossomed into a community uprising, fueled by shared stories, small victories, and unyielding desire for freedom. People who had been silent for years began to speak up. They started questioning the rules that felt unfair or unnecessary. Conversations once held behind closed doors were now happening openly on sidewalks and at local diners. The HOA's authority, once absolute, was now being challenged at every turn. My barn remained the heart of this transformation. It wasn't just a building anymore. It was a meeting place, a symbol, a sanctuary. The trees I planted had grown tall and thick, their dense foliage blocking prying eyes and unwanted interference. They had become the neighborhood's silent guardians, their leaves whispering encouragement to anyone who dared to stand firm. I noticed new faces showing up during our gatherings, families, retirees, young couples, all drawn by the desire to protect their homes and their peace. The community alliance we formed was growing stronger, more organized, and more determined. We pooled resources to hire legal experts who helped us understand our rights and how to counter the HOA's overreach. The HOA tried to respond with a mix of confusion and frustration. Their usual tactics of intimidation and threats no longer worked. Instead, they faced well-prepared neighbors who knew the rules, had legal counsel, and were ready to fight back with facts, not fear. At one meeting, the HOA president appeared tired and defensive. The room was full of residents who asked tough questions and demanded transparency. When challenged about the legality of certain fines and restrictions, the board struggled to provide clear answers. It was a moment that showed the power shift was real. But the fight was far from over. Late one night, I heard noises near the barn. Someone was trying to damage the trees, cutting branches and leaving debris. It was a cruel attempt to break our defense. The next morning, neighbors gathered to help clean up and replant. The act of vandalism only made us more determined. The harvester, once used as a tool of resistance, had become a quiet reminder of what we'd overcome. It sat covered in tarp, blending into the background but always ready, a symbol of strength and readiness. One day, a local journalist reached out, interested in telling our story. The article ran in the regional paper, and suddenly, we were no longer just a small neighborhood fight. Our struggle became a beacon for others dealing with similar battles. Messages poured in from people across the state, thanking us for showing courage and sharing practical advice. The increased attention put more pressure on the HOA. They started holding public forums to listen, or at least appear to listen, to residents' concerns. While progress was slow and uneven, it was clear the board could no longer act with impunity. Amid all this, I took time to walk the property regularly. The trees swayed gently in the breeze, casting moving shadows on the ground. Birds sang overhead, and the air smelled fresh and alive. The barn, once threatened, now stood proudly behind its natural shield. Neighbors stopped by more often, sometimes just to talk, other times to share news or offer help. The sense of community that had been missing for so long was finally returning. Looking back, it was never just about the barn or the police car stunt. It was about reclaiming our right to live peacefully on our own terms, about showing that even when faced with seemingly unstoppable forces, a determined group of people can change the story. The trees would keep growing, and so would we. Together, standing firm against control, ready to protect what matters most.